Hey, I'm just showing him around, Lee said. Her friend's eyes widened in shock. What are you thinking, Kirigaya? You can't spend the night with some stranger. Kirigaya's face turned bright red. Stop imagining weird things. Why are you blushing? She playfully hit him on the chest with her shine eye case. He glared at her, his eyebrows scrunched up in annoyance. Earlier Kirigaya had suggested going to Aome. But his friend had said no. You didn't want to go with me, because you thought we'd get beat up, right? He asked. His friend nodded. Yeah, that's exactly why. We would have gotten flattened over and over if I was with you. Kirigaya shrugged. Well, I'm going anyway. Tell Sigurd and the others. Okay. With that she jumped up, waved goodbye, and ran to grab her bike. As she looked at him, his sad eyes made her feel guilty. But there were already rumors about them going around school, and she didn't want to make things worse. She told herself she was just walking with him, that's all. But every time she thought of Kurito and his weird black eyes, she got nervous and fidgety. Shuga quickly unlocked her bike, which was parked in a corner of the big bike area. She hopped on her bike and took off like a shot. The cold winter air stung her cheeks, but she didn't let it bother her. She rode out of the backyard and zoomed down the big hill, not even touching her brakes. As the wind rushed past her face, she felt free. I just want to fly, she thought to herself, feeling like she was soaring. The idea of flying alongside Kurito at top speed made her heart skip a beat. She rushed home and arrived just before 2 p.m. When she got to the backyard, Kazuto's bike was nowhere to be found. That meant he was probably still at the gym, working out. After everything that happened in Seo, Kazuto had gotten back in shape, but it seemed like that wasn't enough for him. He couldn't shake off the feeling that there was a big difference between who he really was and his online persona. That's just how it is. Our bodies can't do all the cool things our virtual avatars can do. But Shugaha got it. She knew how frustrating it could be. Sometimes she wished she could fly in real life too, and she had even gotten a little too excited on her bike, and almost fallen off. After a long day, Shugaha walked into her house through the backyard, tossed her kendo uniform into the washing machine, and turned it on. Shugaha walked into her bedroom and hung up her gray school uniform and skirt. She took a deep breath and put her hands on her chest, feeling for her heartbeat. Usually biking home from school would get her heart racing, but it should have slowed down by now. Yet, her heart was still pounding away at about 90 beats per minute. Shugaha didn't want to think about why her heart was beating so fast, and it wasn't just because of the bike ride. She tried to calm down by taking slow, deep breaths, but the more she thought about things, the faster her heart beat. What's wrong with me? I'm just showing him the way to Almad. That's all. And I already have enough to worry about with my big brother. Wait. No, I'm not supposed to think about him right now. Stop it. She got so frustrated that she finally threw on a comfy t-shirt and flopped onto her bed. Her atmosphere was sitting on the headboard, staring back at her. She turned it on, and put it over her eyes, taking one last deep breath. Then she said the magic words, "Link start." As soon as she was connected, she opened her eyes to find herself in a new world. She was now Lifa, a brave fairy warrior. The beautiful lily of the valley surrounded her with vibrant colors and amazing sights. But when she looked across the table, there was no one sitting there, just an empty seat. They still had almost an hour before meeting up, but she had some last-minute things to do before they set off on their journey. Stepping out of the tavern, she was greeted by the beautiful morning light, shining down on the town of Swilvane. In the virtual world of Alfheim Online, a day only lasted about 16 hours. This was done so that players who could only log in at certain times of the day would get to experience different parts of the game. Time worked weirdly in Alfheim. Sometimes it matched the real world, and sometimes it didn't. Luckily the menu showed both real time and Alfheim time, so Shugaha could keep track. At first it was confusing, but she actually liked this system. She zoomed from store to store, finishing her shopping just in time to head back to the tavern. As the swinging door creaked open, a mysterious figure in black appeared at the back table. Kurito's eyes fluttered open after he logged in, and a smile spread across his face as he spotted Leaf, walking towards him. "Perfect timing," he exclaimed. But Leafa just chuckled and said, "Actually, I've been here for a bit already. I was just taking care of some things first." Kurito's grin faltered for a moment, as he replied, "Oh, I see." Looks like I need to gear up too, Kirito said. His friend smiled and replied. Don't worry about finding useful stuff, we've got plenty. But. She looked at Kirito's basic sword and armor. You could use an upgrade. Kirito nodded in agreement. Definitely this sword isn't going to be enough. His friend asked. Do you have any money? Hey, I can lend you some cash if you need it. Someone offered. Kirito hesitated. He swung his left hand up to open the game menu and scanned it quickly. For some reason he scrunched up his face in a frown. Is this the money we use in the game Millard? He asked. That's the one, came the reply. Do you have any? Kirito thought for a moment before answering. Actually, I've got a lot. The other person's eyes lit up. Sweet, let's get you some new gear then. Kirito nodded slowly. Okay, then, he suddenly jumped up and started checking himself out from head to toe, like he had just remembered something important. Kirito dug into his shirt pocket and said, Hey Yui, time to go. A tiny black-haired girl with a sleepy face popped out of the pocket, and let out a huge yawn. Earlier Kirito had stopped by Leafa's favorite armory to gear up with some new equipment. Now, as they stood in the town, the morning sun shone brightly overhead. The armor Kirito wore wasn't super fancy, but it would do the job. Kirito was on a mission to gear up with some awesome new clothes. A top, bottom and long coat that would protect him from harm. But the real challenge was finding the perfect sword. He visited a store and the owner showed him one long sword after another. Each time Kirito would swing it once and say, too heavy. The store owner must have been getting tired of hearing that. Finally Kirito found a gigantic great sword that was almost as tall as he was. It was huge, but he liked it. After trying so many swords he was willing to compromise on this one. This thing was huge and super intimidating, probably made for the giant players from the Gnome and Imp teams. In the world of Halo, how much damage you dealt depended on your weapon's power and how fast you could swing it. This meant that Sylphs and Kate Siths had an edge, since they were naturally really agile. To make things fair, stronger players got to wield massive weapons with tons of damage potential. Even a super fast Sylph could learn to fight with a heavy hammer or axe if they practiced enough. But their strength, a secret stat that didn't change, would be too low to make those weapons useful in battle. Spriggans were one of the most versatile groups, but Kirito's body was clearly built for speed, not brute force. Can you actually swing that thing? Leafa asked, throwing up her hands in frustration. Kirito just nodded calmly, like it was no big deal. Leafa had to trust that Kirito knew what he was doing. He paid for the huge sword and strapped it to his back. The tip of the scabbard almost touched the ground. Leafa thought Kirito looked like a kid playing dress-up as a warrior, and she had to hold back a laugh. Let's get going, Kirito exclaimed, holding out his hand for a high five. Nice working with you. A tiny pixie popped out of his pocket and flew over to slap their hands together in celebration. We can do this. To the world tree, with the massive sword on his back, and the little pixie perched on his shoulder, Kirito walked alongside Leafa. After a few minutes they saw a stunning tower in the distance. It was the Tower of Wind, a beautiful jade-green landmark that represented the Sylph homeland. No matter how many times Leafa saw it, she was always amazed by its beauty. As she glanced over at Kirito, she caught him staring at the tower wall with a look of disgust. It was the same wall he had been super close to just the day before. She playfully nudged him with her elbow, trying not to burst out laughing. Hey, do you want some tips on how to stop before we start flying again? She asked. Kirito grumbled. No way, I'm playing it safe from now on. Hey, what's going on with that tower? Someone asked. Are we doing something here? You'll want to use these towers to fly long distances. A voice explained. The extra height really makes a difference. A guy nodded, seeming to understand. Then Leafa gave him a gentle push on the back. Let's get moving. We need to be out of the forest before it gets dark. I'm not sure where we're going though. He said, I don't know this area at all. Can you show me the way? Leafa grinned. Don't worry. I've got you covered. She tapped her chest and looked away from the tower. In the distance they could see a beautiful mansion belonging to the Sylph Lord. It stood out against the bright morning sun, looking really cool. Leafa knew the owner of the huge mansion and their girl named Sakuya. They had played together for a long time. Leafa thought about stopping by to say hello before she left, but something was missing. The flag with the Sylph symbol, which usually flew high on the roof, was nowhere to be seen. Something weird was going on. The master of the house was never away from home. What's up? Kirito asked, looking curious, but Lifa just shook her head. She made a mental note to send a message to Sakuya later. Then she turned and walked into the tower. Inside, the ground floor was like a big circle with lots of shops around the edges. It was like a mini mall. Lifa strode through the doorway, ready to get down to business. In the middle of the lobby, two elevators zoomed up and down. Like they were powered by magic, they swallowed and spat out players at regular times. It was morning in Alfheim, but evening in the real world, so more people were logging in, and the crowd was growing. She grabbed Kirito's arm, and pulled him toward the elevator on the right. Just as it landed on their floor, a group of figures jumped into their path, blocking the way. Lifa spread her wings just in time to avoid crashing into the people in front of her. "Hey, watch it," she exclaimed, before realizing who she was talking to. The man standing in her way was really tall even for a sylph. He had a rugged look that made him seem strong and handsome. It was clear, he was either very lucky or very wealthy to have such striking features. Sigurd was a pretty cool guy. He wore super thick silver armor that protected him from harm, and he had a huge broadsword hanging at his side. A wide silver band wrapped around his forehead, and his dark green hair flowed down to his shoulders. Sigurd was the go-to fighter on the front line of his team, which included Lifa. They had been working together for weeks, taking on all sorts of adventures. As she checked out the people standing with him, she realized they were all part of the same party crew. She scanned the group to see if Reki was there, but his super recognizable golden green hair was nowhere to be found. Sigurd was kind of a big deal. He was always competing with Lifa to be the strongest sylph player around. Imagine a game where players can be in charge of their own group. That's what happened with the sylphs, a team in the game. Sigurd was different from Leif, because he liked being involved in the game's politics. He wanted to help make decisions. The person in charge of the sylphs was called Sakusha, and she got her job by being voted in by the other players every month. As the leader, she got to decide how taxes were used. Sigurd was like her partner, always helping out and doing things for the group. He spent so much time playing that he got really good at it. His skills and equipment were way better than Lifa's, and everyone knew it. When Lifa and her partner dueled, it was always a long and tough fight. Lifa tried to use her amazing athletic skills to break through his strong defense. But even though he was a great hunting partner, she didn't like how bossy he was. Lifa wanted to be able to make her own choices and do what she wanted, without him telling her what to do all the time. She was making good money with her current setup, but she thought it was time to move on. Just then Sigurd appeared, towering over her with a sneer on his face. His smile was more like a mean grin, and she knew this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. "Hello, Sigurd," she said with a forced smile, but he didn't smile back. He suddenly snapped at her. "Are you leaving the party, Lifa?" He was obviously in a bad mood. For a moment, Lifa thought about telling him not to worry, that she was just going to Elman and would be right back. But she had too much on her mind, so she just nodded and said, "Yeah, I guess I am. I've made a lot of money, so I'm gonna take a break," he said with a grin. But his friend wasn't having it. "That's really selfish," she shot back. "Don't you think that will hurt the rest of us?" He looked taken aback. "Selfish? What are you talking about?" This conversation started after a big dueling tournament. 2 months ago, Lifa had beaten Sigurd in an intense match, and later he came up to her with a surprising offer. He told her he was scouting for his party and wanted her to join. She had thought she was clear with him about one thing. She would only join in on the party's fun when it suited her, and she could take off whenever she felt like it. It was supposed to be a totally relaxed arrangement, no pressure at all. Sigurd raised his bushy eyebrows and kept talking. "You're already pretty famous as part of my group. If you leave us without a good reason and join another party, it will shame us and ruin our reputation," they said. Lifa was stunned. She couldn't believe the nerve of this claim. But deep down she knew this moment was bound to happen. After joining Sigurd's party, Rikon had pulled her aside and given her a serious warning. He told her it wasn't a good idea to get too close to this group. Rikon suspected that Sigurd didn't choose Lifa for her fighting skills, but because she could help make his brand look cool. Rekin had a clever move. He asked the warrior who beat him to join his team, but not as an equal. By making him a subordinate, Rekin saved himself from losing respect because of that defeat. Lifa tried to brush off the idea, but Rekin wouldn't give up. In a tough online game like Elo, where skills matter most, Girl players are hard to find. This makes them kind of like celebrities, and their value in the game is based more on being popular than on how good they are at playing. Lifa was a rare find, super talented, and really pretty. According to Recon, girls like her were as hard to come by as legendary weapons. That made her really popular, but also the target of some not-so-nice attention. Luckily Recon wasn't interested in any of that. He just wanted to be real friends with Lifa, without any other motives. To make sure he didn't start thinking about anything else. Lifa gave him a solid punch to the liver with all her might. It was a clear signal to stop that train of thought right in its tracks. She thought about what he had said. To be honest, she didn't feel like a celebrity in the online game. There were already so many things to keep track of that. She didn't want to make things more complicated. She had decided to stick with Sigurd's group, and everything had been going pretty smoothly, until now. But now, with Sigurd yelling at her, Lifa felt like she was getting tangled up in a big mess of problems. She just wanted one thing from LO: to feel like she was flying. She wanted to escape the pressure and stress of her life and soar as far as she wanted. That's all she was looking for. But it turns out, that was a pretty naive idea. Maybe it was just a fantasy, thinking that a virtual world where everyone has wings would be enough to make her forget about her real-life problems. She thought back to the boy from her kendo class who used to pick on her when she was younger. He was older and seemed so much tougher than her back then. He was unbeatable at the dojo until Suguha came along. She was younger and a girl, which made it even more annoying that he couldn't beat her. So, he decided to get his friends together to play a mean prank on her after class. The boy who did it had the same smug smile that Sigurd has now. Lifa looked down, feeling frustrated and disappointed. This place seems just like everywhere else. People think they can push others around, just because they can. Kurito popped out of nowhere, speaking up from behind Lifa. "Companions aren't items," he said. Lifa spun around, her eyes wide with surprise. She had no idea what Kurito meant. Sigurd let out a loud growl. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice rough. Kurito stepped forward, standing between Lifa and the towering Sigurd. He looked up at Sigurd, who was a full head taller than him. "Your fellow players are not like swords or armor," Kurito said, his voice firm. Sigurd's face turned bright red with anger as Kurito spoke up. He swung his long cape behind him and placed a threatening hand on the hilt of his sword. "How dare you!" he shouted. Kurito had really gotten under his skin. Sigurd sneered at Kurito, calling him a miserable trash-digging spriggan. He warned Lifa to stay away from Kurito, saying he was probably just a troublemaker who got kicked out of his own territory. Sigurd was so furious that it looked like he might pull out his sword and attack at any moment. His anger was intense. Lifa lost her cool and shouted back at Sigurd, "Watch your mouth, Kurito is my new partner." Sigurd's face turned red with shock, and a blue vein started pulsing on his forehead. "What?" he grunted. "Lifa, are you ditching our territory?" Lifa's eyes went wide when she heard those words. In the game of Alo, players were divided into two main groups based on how they liked to play. Lifa and Sigurd were part of a group that called their race's territory home. They worked together with other players from their own group and paid taxes to their government to make their team stronger. This way of playing was like being part of a big community, where everyone helped each other out to become more powerful in the game. There were two kinds of players in the game. Some stayed in their own territory while others ventured out to neutral ground where they teamed up with people from different backgrounds. The ones who stayed home thought the ones who left were aimless and called them renegades. They believed that if you left your home, it was because you were kicked out or didn't have a good reason for going. Lifa didn't really feel like she fit in with the rest of her group, the Sylphs, but she stayed because she liked being around Swilvain and didn't want to have to start all over again somewhere new. She wasn't ready to pick up and leave, so she stuck around even if she didn't really feel like part of the crowd. Sigurd's mean words made her want to get away from all this drama even more. She knew she had to face what was really going on inside her head. "Yes, that's right," she said firmly. "I'm leaving." Sigurd's face twisted in anger, showing his clenched teeth. He pulled out his big sword and glared at Kurito with fiery eyes. "I didn't want to bother with you, but you can't just try to steal from me and get away with it," he growled. Kurito didn't seem worried at all when Sigurd threatened him. In fact, he just shrugged his shoulders like it was no big deal. Lifa couldn't believe how calm Kurito was being. She almost rolled her eyes, but she still put her hand on the handle of her katana, ready to jump into action if things got out of control. After all, they were standing in another group's territory, and Sigurd didn't seem like someone to mess with. The air was electric with tension. Then, one of Sigurd's friends spoke up from behind him in a hushed tone. "Not now, Sig. You can't just attack someone who isn't fighting back, especially not in public." It seemed like trouble was brewing, and a crowd had started to form around them. Kirito was just a regular visitor, and if Sigurd hurt him it would make Sigurd look bad. A proper duel or accusation of spying was one thing, but this was different. Sigurd's eyes blazed with anger as he glared at Kirito, his teeth clenched in rage. But he slowly put his sword away. "Stay out of sight from now on," he growled at Kirito, before turning to face Lifa. "If you betray me now you'll be sorry later," Sigurd warned. But the other person just shot back. "I'd rather do that than regret staying with you," Sigurd sneered. "Well, you should practice begging on your hands and knees, because that's what you'll be doing when you want to come crawling back." He turned and stormed out of the tower, his friends chasing after him. They glanced back at Lifa, looking like they wanted to say something, but they just shook their heads and ran to catch up with Sigurd. Once they were gone, Lifa let out a deep sigh. "I'm sorry I got you into this," one of them said. The other replied, "No way, I'm the one who made things worse." "But are you really sure about leaving your territory?" Lifa hesitated, unsure of what to say. Then she gave Kirito a gentle push on the back, and they walked through the crowd that had gathered around them. They jumped into the elevator and headed out. She pressed the button for the top floor, and suddenly the big stone circle that was the elevator platform lit up green. Whoosh! It zoomed up through a clear glass tube. In no time the elevator stopped, and the glass wall slid open silently. The white morning sun poured in, bringing a gentle breeze with it. Lifa stepped out onto the observation deck, taking in the amazing view from the top of the tower. As she stood on this familiar landing, the breathtaking view in every direction still managed to thrill her. The Sylph territory was located in the southwest part of Alfheim. Looking west, she saw a vast stretch of plains that suddenly dropped off into the ocean, a huge blue expanse of water that seemed to go on forever. To the east, a huge forest stretched out as far as the eye could see. It was bordered by purple mountains that rose up in the distance. But beyond those mountains, something even bigger caught Kirito's attention: the World Tree. It was so massive that it looked like a giant shadow looming over everything. Kirito's eyes widened in amazement as he gazed out at the view. "Wow, this is incredible," he exclaimed. He squinted into the distance, feeling like he could almost touch the sky. The blue above seemed so close, and Kirito couldn't help but feel a pang of longing as he stared out at it. His eyes were filled with wonder, and he couldn't look away from the breathtaking sight. Lifa stretched out her hand, gazing up at the sky. "Right," she said with a smile. "When you look out at this huge sky, it makes all your worries seem tiny in comparison." Kirito looked at her with a worried face, but Lifa smiled back to calm him down. "Honestly, it's okay," she said. "I was already thinking about leaving. So this is actually a good chance for me to move on. I was too scared to take the leap on my own, but now, it seems like I've really messed things up. After what happened, I don't think there was a way to leave without drama." She started talking to herself, wondering out loud, why does everything always have to be about being in control, or losing control?